What is up, Wizards? It's Mooner. I'm back, and today we're discussing Weathervane, Iyslander CC, classic constructed deck. We're going to discuss Weathervane. We're going to discuss a little bit of the meta. We're going to discuss some sideboarding. We're going to discuss just everything about it going forward. So I did take this deck to Baltimore. Spoiler alert, I didn't do all that great. I didn't do as great as I would have liked to. I just ran into a wall of Oldhams, and spoiler alert, Oldham, the aggressively slanted Oldhams, the more mid-range to aggressive slanted, is probably one of the worst matchups for this deck. So we're going to talk about how maybe we can shore that matchup up a little bit today. But yeah, let's just get into it. So, for those of you who don't know, Iyslander Stormbind is an elemental wizard hero. She was introduced in Everfest as the young version, and then she came to life as her adult version, came to in Uprising. She's an elemental wizard hero. She starts at 36 health and 4 intellect, and she has Essence of Ice. If it's not your turn, you may play blue non-attack action cards from your arsenal as though they were instants, and whenever you play an ice card during your opponent's turn, create a frostbite under their control. So just in case you're not aware, this is a Weathervane is kind of a fringe style of playing. This is an archetype that is based around proactive disruption. You're basically trying to create as much disruption in the form of frostbites and taxing effects as you possibly can on your opponent, and essentially time walking them or making it so that they have a very, very difficult time doing anything on their turn. And you are kind of playing a tempo game where you are stopping them from doing things on their turn, therefore using disruption as a proactive form of defense, and then turning those frostbites into damage via things like Freezing Point and Frost Hex. But real quick, I'm just going to go over the entire deck. For those of you who are familiar with the deck, not much has changed in the 51 main board, but a little bit can change, and we're going to talk about all of that today. This is going to be more of a long form video. I hope you guys stick around, and I hope this, helps people. But so anyways, we are playing Iyslander, obviously, and we're going to get into the equipment. We got my Cold Foil Frosty that is needed, but I'm going to go over the main pieces that never change, and that is going to be Stormstriders, obviously the best equipment in the game, arguably hands down in my opinion. This just has instant pay 1 resource. The Stormstriders, you may play your next wizard non-attack action card as though it were an instant. It also comes with Arcane Barrier 2, and it has no defense on it. So what you are essentially doing is you are taking an additional turn by breaking your Stormstriders on your opponent's turn, playing your next wizard non-attack action card as though it were an instant, dealing them damage. There's lots of combo potential and everything like that. But hopefully you guys are all familiar with Iyslander and partially familiar with Weathervane and what I'm doing, but if not, Stormstriders is busted. Next, our next piece of constant equipment is Fendel Spring Tunic. This is the only chest piece I run, as well as Stormstriders is the only boots I run. Just being able to get that resource every 3 turns at instant speed is absolutely crucial to facilitating plays that this deck wants to make. I run this in every matchup, even in the wizard matchups. Just being able to get that resource at instant speed really helps make this deck work. Fendel Spring Tunic is an absolutely busted piece of equipment. If you don't own one yet, you just get it. I don't ever see it getting banned per se, but it might get pushed out of the format. It is just so busted. Next, we have 2 different headpieces. Our main primary headpiece is Coronet Peak. This comes in for just about every matchup. Action, pay 3 resources. Target hero discards a card unless they pay 1 resource. It has Blade Break and defends for 2. Yes, this is getting chucked as a block a lot of times to block a lot of those crucial on hits. But it does have a very, very amazing effect. Being able to trade a card, trade a blue from your hand on your turn for a card on your opponent's turn. Basically turns your opponent into Data Doll for a turn, as long as they don't have Tunic up and are paying for that resource tax with Tunic. You are stripping a card from their hand every single turn, and you are giving them one less thing to do. But this is a secondary effect or taxation effect in this deck. Basically, that effect is only being used when you're really forced to block and are down to like 1 or 2 cards in hand, and you just need to slow your opponent down a little bit. But most of the time, this is just being used to block, but it does have a great effect that I love. The next piece we have is Norrøn Hood, and this comes in for the wizard matchups. Just being able to go, mostly for Kano, just being able to go up to AB5, or I'm sorry, AB4, just to block some of those really crucial on hits like Lessons in Lava and things like that. It is really important to have an extra piece of Norrøn against Kano. So Norrøn Hood comes in. And then we have our arm pieces. Our primary arm piece is Ironhide Gauntlet. These are our primary gloves. Just being able to block. A lot of times we have Tunic resource up, or a lot of times we are playing a 0 cost from Arsenal and following it up with Waning Moon, so we have an extra resource left over. Just being able to efficiently spend that resource for blocking for 2 is really important. This deck does not block all that well, so having an equipment piece that can cover up some of those major breakpoints is important. And lastly, we have Metacarpus Node. This is in there for the extra arcane barrier, but I run Metacarpus Node anytime I actually have an option to. I really love Metacarpus Node. It can be just an extra 2 source. So think of it this way. Ironhide Gauntlet will save you 2 life. Metacarpus Node will extend your damage output by 2. So this will save you 2 life. This will extend your damage output by 2. Because whenever you play a card with an effect that deals arcane damage, you may pay 1 resource. If you do, that effect deals that much damage plus 1 at the beginning of the end phase, destroy Metacarpus Node. So you can play a blue spell from Arsenal, pay a resource as Metacarpus Node triggers, and that it will deal an extra damage. And then you can break your boots, pay a resource to do so, and then play a spell like Freezing Point. It'll come in for, like, let's say just 12 or 13, and then you can bump it up by paying an additional resource. It'll come in for 14. You get the idea. Ironhide Gauntlet comes in when you need to be more defensive. Metacarpus comes in when you need to be more aggressive. And there are a lot of matchups where you really want to be more aggressive, and just you'd rather deal that damage instead of save that life. So if that makes any sense. But that is all the equipment. These are the only equipment pieces I run. And at the end of the video, I will do a sideboard guide, and I will get into which matchups I run which ones into. But I just want to go over the deck in its entirety first off. So let's go over the main board. I run a 51 card main board, meaning that 51 of these cards out of the 80 will minus 7 for the equipment. So 51 out of the 73 never change. From there, I bring in either 9 or 10 cards, depending on the matchup. But these 51 cards stay constant throughout every single matchup. And there is one caveat, and I will get into that at the end of the video, where we can discuss changing some things or adapting and improving on the Weathervane archetype, depending on the meta and where I see the meta being. And I waited to make this video because I wanted to see what the ban is suspended announcement gave us. I was copiumly hoping for them giving us back amulets. I would never expect hypothermia to come back, but I did think that maybe there was a chance that we would get Amulet of Ice back, even though I know Lexi can take full advantage of that. She is more of a fuseless style now, and we'll talk about that in the meta, but in the meta discussion. But the fuseless lists aren't really using amulets, and it's a 0 block for her, which can be a liability. So I thought maybe Brian Gottlieb and the LSS team would be like, okay, you know what, Iyslander has really dipped in representation in the meta, so let's give her back to her amulets. I was hoping, but it didn't happen. Anyways, there was no changes to the ban and suspend announcement in Classic Constructed. So that being said, let's just get into the deck. So we're going to go over the reds first, then the yellows, and finally the blues. I will try to briefly explain why every single card is in the deck, but I'm going to clump the reds and the yellows together because we're going to start out with the namesake of this deck, which is 3 red Iyslander Weathervanes, and we are running 3 yellow Iyslander Weathervanes. Now, these stay in the deck for every single matchup. Basically, Iyslander Weathervane is a time walk. This card reads, the red reads, it costs 1, it defends for 2, and it has go again. And it says, the next time you ice fuse this turn, create 4 frostbite tokens under target hero's control. And the yellow does 3. Now, this deck is wholly centered around ice fusing and creating those frostbites, and using Iyslander Weathervane to facilitate that. And then following it up with like a 0-cost blue ice card from Arsenal to just tax on a couple of extra frostbites and some more disruption. But we are trying to pair these cards with any number of red fuse spells and yellow fuse spells, damage dealing arcane spells. So we are pairing Iyslander Weathervanes with those spells to create damage and taxation effects from some of the and disruption effects from the spells, and then creating frostbites by ice fusing. For instance, let's get into some of the reds. For instance, Polar Cap. I run 3 red Polar Caps. Now, this is a caveat. This is a card that we're going to discuss a little bit going forward as possibly a cut or a replacement, or even altering our sideboard. But currently, I run 3 red Polar Caps. This card costs 2. It defends for 3. It has Ice Fusion, and it deals 4 arcane damage to any target. If Polar Cap was fused and deals damage to a hero, create a Frostbite token under their control. Now, as far as spells are concerned, this is one of the most inefficient ones, but it pairs so beautifully with Iyslander Weathervane. 2 + 1 is 3, so 2 resources plus 1 resource from a Weathervane is 3, and this is going to come in for 4 arcane, and it's going to create 4 frostbites or 3 frostbites, and then an additional frostbite on hit. And there are 0 decks out there currently that are running AB4, so it is always going to hit and deal damage, and it is always going to create an additional frostbite. So for an Iyslander Weathervane, a Polar Cap, a blue, and an Ice Fusion card, we are creating 5 frostbites and dealing 4 arcane damage, which is pretty good. But baseline on itself, by itself, Polar Cap is one of the weakest ones because the cost curve is a little awkward. You can't really pair it with Waning Moon all that efficiently. Oh, and I forgot, Waning Moon is in the deck. It is the only weapon I run. It is not in my equipment board right now. I apologize, but Waning Moon is the only, it's actually in my Kano deck right now. I apologize for that. Waning Moon is the only weapon we are using in this deck. Sorry about that. I'm not going to restart the video, but anyways, Polar Cap doesn't really pair very well with Waning Moon because Waning Moon costs 2 and Polar Cap costs 2, so you have to pitch a little bit extra to get your Waning Moon off. But currently in the deck, I am running 3 red Polar Caps. Next, we are running 3 Encase. Encase only comes in red, and it is a 0-cost block 3 Ice Fusion arcane spell that deals 3 arcane damage to any target. If Encased was fused and deals damage to a hero, freeze that hero and all equipment they control until the start of their next turn. Now, this effect is massively powerful, and it's really, really good into the current meta. Encase being fused and dealing damage to a hero is going to freeze that hero, so they can't use their hero ability unless it is a triggered or a passive ability. Like Katsu is a triggered or passive ability. Briar is a triggered or a passive ability. Anytime Briar deals damage, she creates an embodiment. Anytime she plays 2 non-attack action cards in a row or whatever, she creates an embodiment of lightning. You can't, turning her hero ability off does not prevent that from happening. It's going to happen because it is a triggered or a passive ability, meaning that anytime the condition is met, it is triggered. The same thing with Katsu. But hero abilities that you can shut off that are really powerful are things like Lexi. You can turn her hero ability off to where she cannot, her hero ability is an action, or it's an activated ability. So anything that is an activated ability, and this goes for equipment as well. You can't turn off New Horizons, but you can turn off Skullbone Crosswrap. You can prevent your opponent from activating their Tunic. It will still take up, but you can prevent them from activating it. You can prevent them from activating their Snapdragon Scalers or their Bullseye Bracers. So this card is really good into a meta that is running low AB, such as the Rangers. And other things like that. And even Katsu, you can prevent them from using their equipment. And the ninjas, you can prevent 5 from tutoring up a Phoenix Flame if an Encase hits. So going into a meta with low AB, the stocks on Encase go massively up, and the amount of things that you can freeze and prevent go massively up. And freezing equipment and hero ability also counts for another card that we'll talk about in a minute. But it is also one of your combo pieces. So for that, 3 Encase are in the main board, and is a 0 cost that pairs very nicely with, you can pair it with multiple Weathervanes. You can play an Encase, a red and a yellow Weathervane, and just create massive amounts of Frostbites, freeze a bunch of their equipment, and just disrupt them in numerous multiple ways. Next, we have 3 copies of Aether Icevane Red, and we have 3 copies of Aether Icevane Yellow in the main board. Just 3 resources. It blocks 3, and it has Ice Fusion. Spoiler, all of the spells, the red and yellow spells, have Ice Fusion, which is very, very important. But this deals 5 arcane damage to any target. If Aether Icevane was fused and deals damage to a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2. Anybody who's been on the opposing end of an Aether Icevane, or anybody who's been playing Aether Icevane, knows how absolutely busted this card can be. Just stripping a card from your opponent, dealing them damage, triggering your fusion effects, it's just massively, it's busted. And it pairs really well with Weathervane, but you have to have a Tunic resource or an energy potion to do so, which is probably for the best because it is such a toxic play. Playing a Weathervane and then playing an Aether Icevane, dealing them damage, stripping them a card, and then just giving them Frostbites. Your opponent is pretty much time walked at that point, meaning they pretty much can't do, unless they have a handful of blues, they pretty much can't do anything. And if they do have that handful of blues, they're probably not volleying back much of an offense anyways. And the last red spell we're going to talk about, which is one of the cruxes of this deck, is Freezing Point. This is a red spell that costs 3, it blocks for 3, it has Ice Fusion, and it says deal 5 arcane damage to target hero. If Freezing Point was fused, instead deal X arcane damage, where X is 5 plus the number of Frostbites, Ice Afflictions, and frozen cards they control. Now, as far as frozen cards, it does consider cards frozen by Encase, and it pairs so nicely with Weathervane. So the way that works is Weathervane is a triggered ability that goes on the stack first. It sees that you have fused, it creates the Frostbites, and then Freezing Point will check that Frostbites. So if you pair Freezing Point with a red Weathervane, you play the Weathervane first, and then you play the Freezing Point. That goes on the stack. You fuse. That resolves first. The Frostbites are created. Those in the red sense, it would be 4. Freezing Point is going to check how many Frostbites your opponent controls. As it resolves, it's going to see that your opponent controls 4 Frostbites. It is going to count those 4 Frostbites and add that as X plus the 5, so it's going to come in for 9. So if you can manage to pair it with 2 Weathervanes, or if you have things like Ice Afflictions, and Ice Afflictions are things like Hypothermia, which currently is banned, but also things like what we're going to get into in a minute, Frost Hex, which is another part of the engine of this deck. It also counts frozen cards like in your arsenal. So if you have frozen your opponent's arsenal, it will count that as well. Its hero ability and all of its equipment. If you freeze the hero, that does count as a card, and all the equipment, it counts that as well. So if you pair it with an Encase beforehand, let's say on your turn, and then you somehow break your boots and play Freezing Point, it's going to count all the cards frozen by Encase and count that as well, as well as any of the Frostbites. Freezing Point has one of the highest ceilings of any arcane spell in the game, only paralleled next to, let's say, I would say Blazing Aether. It is the only other arcane spell that on its own can get up to in the mid 20s of damage If you are pairing it with multiple Weathervanes, playing it in case on the previous turn, there are many hoops that you need to jump through to get it that high. But getting this to the average of like 9, pairing it with a Weathervane, or 12, having a couple Frost Hexes out, or pairing it with an encase and having it coming in for like 10 to 12 is fairly easy, and you should be able to do with some practice pretty consistently. Freezing Point is one of your biggest damage dealing spells in the deck. Therefore, it is one that you should prioritize not blocking with, and trying to really make those plays of pairing it with a Weathervane, you know, pitching an encase and a Freezing Point for late game, and then, you know, encasing your opponent, and then pairing it with like some Frost Hexes and a couple Weathervanes. Anyways, Freezing Point can get into the massive amounts of damage, and hitting your opponent with a Freezing Point for like 22 damage is just always going to be GG's. There's really no way they can come back from that, because they probably have a massive amount of Frostbites and multiple Frost Hexes on them. So, you know, being at life totals of in the high 30s, it is still, you know, going to be game over for your opponent. Anyways, that is all the reds and the yellows currently in the main deck. And like I said, these cards never change from match to match. They stay in for every single match. Now let's get into the blues. And we're going to start off with 3 Frost Hex. This is Iyslander Specialization. It blocks for 3. It is an Ice Wizard action card, so it is an ice card. It costs 3, and it is a blue. And Frostbites you control have, at the beginning of your end phase, this deals 1 arcane damage to you. Now, this is something that your opponent controls. You play Frost Hex, and it goes into play under your opponent's control. It stays there, and currently there are very few ways for your opponent to actually remove a Frost Hex or an Affliction from them. One of them being Thaw, one of them being the Warhorn, the Imperial Warhorn, and there is like a Runeblade card or 2 that can get rid of Frost Hex. But other than that, once your opponent controls a Frost Hex, they control that Frost Hex for the rest of the game, and they are multiplicative. So if they control 1, 2, or 3, that does matter, because Frostbites will check how many Frostbites they control, or Frost Hexes they control, and deal them 1 arcane damage at their beginning of their end step, for each Frost Hex you control. So if your opponent controls 3 Frostbites and you have 3 Frost Hex on them, that is going to be 9 damage. So that is pretty massive. Frost Hex is one of those cards that in this deck, you really only need 2 is the magic number. If you can get 3 in some of those long games like Control Dash or something like that, that would be ideal. Or against Bravo, that can be ideal as well. But usually you can get away with only having 1 or 2, because you are kind of playing a tempo game where you are just dealing them some damage and really disrupting them. And the Frostbites that you are giving to your opponent you're turning them around and having them deal damage to them. It is just kind of like an added bonus, just being able to deal them some extra arcane damage. So having 2 is like the magic number, so don't be afraid to either pitch or block with one of your Frost Hexes, as long as you can get 1 or 2 on them. Next, we have the most disruptive permanent in the game, and that is Insidious Chill. This is an ice action aura. It blocks for 2. It costs 3. Insidious Chill enters the arena with 3 frost counters on it, and when it has no frost counters on it, destroy it. Whenever you Ice Fuse, remove a frost counter from Insidious Chill. If you do, target hero discards a card unless they pay 2. So this has like that static ability of Aether Ice Vein, so whenever you Ice Fuse, it is an automatic trigger. It is not a may, it is a must. Your opponent must discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. Insidious Chill is absolutely amazing. Next, we have 3 Ice Eternals coming in blue. This has XX. It's an Iyslander Specialization. XX is a cost. It does block for 3, but this has Ice Fusion. Create X Frostbite tokens under target hero's control. Then if Ice Eternal is fused, deal arcane damage to that hero equal to the number of Frostbites they control. Now, this pairs very, very well with Weathervane. Or you can pump resources into it. The XX simply means that you have to pay resources into it. So X being the number of resources you pay into it. Let's say, for instance, the XX cost, you are paying 6 resources. These are my resources that I'm pitching. X will be the half of that. So it will be 3. So X will equal 3 because X, obviously. So for every blue that you pitch, that will be, it's kind of confusing. So for every 2 resources you pitch into it, X will equal 1. I hope that makes sense. But Ice Eternal doesn't care how much resources you pitch into it or how your opponent gets those frostbites. Ice Eternal, if it is fused, only cares on how many frostbites your opponent controls. So playing Ice Eternal by itself without fusion creates frostbites. You can pair it with things like Weathervane to create more frostbites, but when you fuse it, then it goes ahead and checks how many frostbites your opponent controls, and it deals arcane damage equal to the amount of frostbites it controls. So you can pitch absolutely 0 into this and pair it with a red or a yellow Weathervane. The red Weathervane will create 4 frostbites, and then you fuse Ice Eternal by revealing an ice card, and Ice Eternal will check that, see how many frostbites your opponent controls as it resolves, and then deal arcane damage equal to the number of that. So you can also pair Weathervane with pitched resources. So you can pitch, like, let's say 6 into it and pair it with a red Weathervane, and X will equal 3. Red Weathervane will resolve and create 4 frostbites. So so the frostbites created will total 7 as Ice Eternal fully resolves. So the 4 frostbites will be created first from Eisenhower Weathervane, and then 3 additional frostbites will be created because you pitched 6 resources into Ice Eternal, and then you fuse it, and then it checks as it resolves how many frostbites your opponent controls, which is 4 plus 3 is 7, and it deals them 7 arcane damage. So the ceiling on Ice Eternal is really, really high. And if you pair it with a couple Weathervanes, it just gets even higher. And if you create frostbites on your turn and then put Ice Eternal into your arsenal and play Ice Eternal on your opponent's turn, when your opponent goes to make an action, those frostbites stay on the stack until that action has resolved. So you have a priority window in resolution of that action being played, and you can play Ice Eternal from Arsenal at instant speed because of Iyslander's hero ability. And you don't have to pitch a single resource into it. As long as you fuse it, it's going to check that your opponent still controls those frostbites, and it's going to deal them damage to arcane damage to your opponent as those frostbites are breaking. They are still in control of them. Even though they are paid for and are breaking, they still control them until that action resolves. So Ice Eternal is one of your massive big play cards. It also just pitches for blue and blocks for 3. But it is a card that you want to be pairing with Weathervanes. It is a card that you want to be pitching for the late game. It is a card that is just so massively flexible. It's one of the best cards in the deck because of how flexible it is. You can just play it for 0 and trigger your Insidious Chills if you want. Or you can pair it with some Weathervanes, or you can just pitch a bunch of resources into it, break your energy potions, and create a whole bunch of frostbites, and then follow it up with another Ice Eternal, paying 0 into it and fusing it. It's just, there's so many tricky plays that you can do with Ice Eternal. It is just really, really strong. All right, next we're going to talk about, I'm going to group these cards together, and that is Polar Blast and Cold Snap. Cold Snap and Polar Blast. Polar Blast is basically just copies 4, 5, and 6 of Cold Snap. It costs 1 resource. It blocks for 2, and they both have that effect where when you play it from Arsenal, it replaces itself. You get to draw a card. So Cold Snap also has text where it reads, target hero may pay 1. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. If Cold Snap is played from Arsenal, draw a card. Polar Blast basically has a blank text box except for the last bit of text there. Target opposing hero may pay 1 resource. If they don't, your next attack this turn gains Dominate, which there are no attacks in this deck, or in the main board at least, that care about getting Dominate because there are no attacks. There are no attack action cards in this deck. But Polar Blast does read, if this played from Arsenal, draw a card, and it has Go Again. So the play is playing Cold Snap from Arsenal, obviously, paying a blue to pay for it, drawing a card so Polar Blast replaces itself, and then you have 2 resources left over to play Waning Moon. So you are creating a Frostbite, you are drawing a card, and you are dealing 3 damage with Waning Moon, basically for 1 blue. It's just really strong. It's a really great way to help cycle through your deck and get through your power cards. It is also a very, very efficient way to get some chip damage in with Waning Moon. And it is one of the very few cards that you want to be playing from Arsenal. The next card that you want to be playing from Arsenal is Channel Lake Frigid. I don't really think I need to explain a whole lot about Channel Lake Frigid, but I run 3 copies. Moving on with the blues, I'm going to move these up a little bit. We have 3 copies of Winter's Bite. This is a card that I put in blue. It blocks for 2. Target hero discards a card unless they pay 1, and it has go again. So this is basically just a card that you can play it on your turn and tax your opponent a little bit. It has that Coronet Peak effect where you play Winter's Bite, they discard a card unless they pay 1. But you can also play this from Arsenal, and it is very important that it costs 0 because most of the spells that you want to be playing from Arsenal should cost 0. You don't want to this is a proactive strategy. You don't really want to be playing spells from Arsenal that cost resources because you need those resources and those cards on your turn so that you can act your game plan of pairing Weathervanes with various fuse spells and creating Frostbites. This is just one of those cards that will tax your opponent just a little bit more and create an additional Frostbite on them on their turn. So it's going to take a card from their hand, and it's going to give them an additional Frostbite. So it's essentially taxing them twice. It's essentially taxing them 2 resources on their turn, giving them that extra Frostbite. So hopefully, and stripping 1 more resource from them. Next we have Frosting. This is an ice card that deals 1 arcane damage to them. It costs 0 and it blocks for 3. Basically, this is just a filler card. Same with Aether Hail. Frosting is a little bit higher value because it does cost 0, so it is okay to play from Arsenal because it's not costing you any resources. It's dealing them a damage, and it is giving them a Frostbite. So it's basically the same thing as Winter's Bite, except for it blocks for 3. It just deals them 1 arcane damage instead of taking a card from their hand, which mathematically is basically the same thing. Frosting just also blocks for 3, and you can't use it on your turn. Well, you can use it on your turn just to ping them for 1 arcane damage, but Winter's Bite will strip a card from their hand on your turn, whereas if you're playing it from Arsenal on your opponent's turn, it basically does the exact same thing as a Winter's Bite, where it's going to tax them 2 points of value, 1 damage and 1 resource. Winter's Bite just deals them 1 resource and 1 Frostbite. So you kind of get the idea. Aether Hail is arguably the worst card in the deck, but it is kind of a necessary evil. We want to keep our ice count as high as possible. This does block 3, and it costs 1, and it deals 2 arcane damage to any target. So it is kind of like Frosting, except for it costs 1, and it deals 1 more arcane damage. This does pair nicely with Moon, where you can pitch a blue, deal them 2 arcane damage, give them a Frostbite, and follow up with Waning Moon for 3 more arcane damage. So basically, for 1 blue and this card from Arsenal, it is 6 points of value, which can be good. It can be fine, but this is probably my least favorite Arsenal target, and that is because it actually costs resources, and it is going to cost you at least 1, but probably a blue from your hand on your opponent's turn, taking a card out of your hand, and that is not something that we generally want to be doing in this deck. We want to be proactive, and that is more of a reactive strategy, where you're going to react to your opponent and you're going to deal them a little bit of damage on their turn. This deck doesn't want to be really dealing damage to your opponent on their turn unless it is in the form of Frostbite tax and Frostbite damage via Frost Tex. But so that being said, this is probably my least favorite Arsenal target, but sometimes it happens that it does end up in Arsenal. And it's not the worst thing because, like I said, it does fit your cost curve of just only costing 1 blue to be worth 6 points of value. And lastly, we're going to talk about the last 3 blues in the deck, and that is 2 Energy Potion. Energy Potion, I found that you need at least 1. But you don't want any more than 2. 2 is the magic number for this deck. Just being able to gain 2 resources at instant speed. It is an item, obviously. So you can play it from Arsenal. It does cost 0. It isn't going to tax your opponent anything. but it will turn on Waning Moon. But being able to gain 2 resources at instant speed by having an energy potion on the board, you can pump that into Ice Eternal. You can break an energy potion and play 2 Weather Vanes and pair that with something like an Aether Ice Vein. Just having extra resources can really facilitate some really massive plays. And the same reason that Tunic is so important in this deck, Energy Potion is also important in this deck. It is a blue, it does block 0, but a lot of times you are just pitching Energy Potion. But in those games that are going to go long, it is very important to get an Energy Potion out. Energy Potion is really important in the Wizard matchups. Energy Potion is really important in those matchups where you're trying to combo. So having 2 Energy Potion in the main board is very important. And last, we're going to talk about Heart of Fendal. Is this card absolutely necessary in the deck? I would say no. But if you have one, would I run it? 100% yes. I would never cut this card because this is a deck that doesn't really like to block all that well. It does block when it has to, but it's not part of its strategy. Blocking and preventing damage is not part of its strategy. Preventing damage by disruption and taxation is its strategy. And sometimes you have to take a lot of damage to enact that strategy. And Heart of Fendal can just keep you alive. When you pitch Heart of Fendal, if you have less life than your opposing hero, you gain a life. And spoiler alert, most of the time you're going to have less life than your opponent as you set up a board and as you start to enact your strategy and trying to get into your loop, as I like to call it. Get into your loop. And Heart of Fendal can just kind of keep you alive. Sometimes this deck can drag out the game and go to 3rd or 4th cycle and gain you a life every time you pitch it. Is just one of the ways that you can stay alive. There are more games than I would like to admit where I have gone down to 1 life in order to get a win, and Heart of Fendal has probably saved my life, quite literally. If you don't have it, what would I run? Possibly another Energy Potion, or I'm not really sure. If I didn't have a Heart of Fendal, I would definitely run another blue. It would probably be Energy Potion. So, but if you don't, I really suggest you do run Heart of Fendal. It is part of the deck. All right, so now let's get into the sideboard. And with the sideboard, I want to do a little meta discussion. So in Baltimore, the meta kind of... Oh, sorry about that. I kicked that and shook the camera. The top players in the meta were Rangers, obviously, Dromai, and some Oldhim. A lot of the top decks right now are Lexi, Azalea, Dromai, Oldhim. There's some Azuri sprinkled in there, although she didn't make any top 8. Dash won the calling. Viserai has been kind of poking his head around and making a resurgence, making a bit of comeback from Zach Bunn piloting Viserai. But I have come across a lot of people testing out that deck on Talishar lately. But the main players in the meta right now are the Rangers and Dromai. And this deck is really good into those 2 decks. Dromai is kind of a very red line aggro deck. If you're facing up against the Empress, Dromai, and it's one of the best matchups for this deck, honestly. She just really can't deal with the amount of disruption that we can present to her and volley back any kind of significant amount of damage. And if she tries to set up a board state of dragons, there's just so many ways that we can deal with those dragons with some of the spells from Arsenal, just pinging them off in the layer step, or just taxing them with Channel like Frigid, or just creating so many frostbites that her handful of reds can't possibly pay through them and attack with those dragons. So if you know how to play that matchup, it is, I don't want to say a buy, but it is incredibly favored for us. But let's get into the sideboard, and we're going to talk about a couple cards that I have been testing and that might be flex spots for you guys. But mainly, I'm going to get into currently what I have in the sideboard. So I run 3 blue Arctic Incarcerations. I run 3 Expose the Elements. I run 3 blue Ice Binds currently. I run 3 blue Brain Freeze. I run 3 Blizzards. I run 1 blue Eisenhower Weathervane. I run 3 Read the Ripples in blue. And I run 2 yellow Fendel's Fighting Spirit and 1 Nourishing Emptiness. Now, I'm going to go over which matchups these cards come in, and I will try to provide a Google Docs document in the description with the deck list, going over all those matchups as well. But let's just get into some of... All right, we're going to start with Brain Freeze and Blue Ice Bind. Now, like I said, this deck is a 51 card main board, and Blue Brain Freeze and Blue Ice Bind are cards 52, 53, and 54, depending on the matchup. Brain Freeze is going to come in any matchup where Brain Freeze is good. So the Rangers, they run a lot of 0 costs. Azuri runs a lot of 0 cost. Any matchup that you can expect has a lot of 0 cost actions in their deck, Brain Freeze is going to come in. So the Rangers, Azuri, any of the Ninjas, any of the aggro decks, mainly Dromai, this comes in because she does run a lot of 0 costs. Her Blaze Headlongs and her Snatches, and Azuri with her Isolates and all those other things. Any matchup where you can comfortably snipe a card in from playing Brain Freeze from Arsenal, and it fuses, which is very important, and it costs 0 and it blocks 3. These are all very important things for being cards 52, 53, and 54. They must be blue, they must cost 0, they must block 3, and they must contain Ice Fusion. So that's why I've landed on Brain Freeze and Ice Bind. Ice Bind does have utility, but Brain Freeze is not good in every single matchup. Brain Freeze is not good against the Guardians. Brain Freeze is not good against the Warriors. Who run a lot of who preface attacking with their weapon and run a lot of reactions and things like that. Brain Freeze is not good against those decks that don't run a lot of 0 costs, that have higher attacks like Levia and things like that. And that's when we're going to bring in Ice Bind. Now, Ice Bind doesn't really do such a bang up job. It is just more that 0 cost Ice Fusion that blocks 3 and pitches for blue. But it does deal 1 arcane damage to any target, and if Ice Bind was fused and deals damage to a hero, freeze a card in their arsenal until the start of your next turn. Now sometimes I can bring an Ice Bind in against Dromai, who I expect to be more on the Rake the Embers plan, because it can ping off an Ashwing. But it does have a lot of utility there, and it does demand a card from your opponent. So if they do plan on using their arsenal, it does demand a card at instant speed, because it is going to deal them a damage, and if they want to use that arsenal, they have to cover up that damage. So Icebind is not a totally useless card. It is actually a really good card if it is used properly. It can just take a card, demand a card from your opponent at instant speed, and that does have a lot of utility. But so these two come in. One of these comes in every single matchup currently, as the deck currently stands, I should preface. Next, we're going to talk about Expose the Elements. I do run 3 copies of this. Oldhim is one of the toughest matchups for this deck, because of one thing and one thing. Not only his ability just to present massive attacks and follow them up with pummels and disruption and have a lot of blues to pay for everything, but Crown of Seeds. Crown of Seeds is enemy number 1 to this deck, because Crown of Seeds can just break all our Frostbites at instant speed and do it very efficiently for him by drawing him another card. So getting rid of Crown of Seeds is a very high top priority, and because Oldhim is such a top contender in the meta right now, we have to run 3 copies of Expose the Elements. But it also comes in against Kano, and I am a Kano player, so I really respect Kano, and being able to destroy his boots and then his Illuvian Constellus and get rid of all his Arcane Barrier, you're pretty much taking that match. Expose the Elements takes that matchup from like a 50-50 matchup to like a 90-10 matchup. Any Caneo player out there who I generally don't even play them because the matchup is so insanely favored in Weathervane's favor, because you're just going to expose their boots and then expose their Illuvian Constellus and take away all their Arcane Barrier and take away their win condition. So I do run that in there, and I also run it into Iyslander as well. Just being able to get rid of her boots and her Illuvian Constellus, it's going to make that matchup much easier. But like I said, primarily this comes in to get rid of Crown of Seeds. It is important to expose the crown as soon as possible if you want to have any significant chance of enacting your game plan against Oldhim. So that's why Expose the Elements is in the sideboard. Next, we have 3 copies of Arctic Incarceration Blue. This is just in here because it is a 0 cost. It is an ice card. It does pitch for blue, and it creates essentially 2 frostbites when you play it on your opponent's turn. So it is in here just to keep our ice count high. It is in here just to add a little bit of extra taxation. If your opponent controls 3 frost hexes, this can be a 0 for 6, because creating 2 frostbites, it's going to deal them 6 damage with 3 frostbites. So it does have a lot of application there. It comes in for matchups like Oldhim and Bravo and things like that. Matchups where, and I'm going to group that together with Blizzard. Because Blizzard is what we're going to bring in for matchups where you expect your opponent to be going wide. This is really kind of a must against like decks like Lexi, decks like Katsu, decks like Briar. Although Briar is an insanely easy matchup, but you want to be bringing in Blizzard into the ninjas and the not Azalea, because Azalea is only going to be presenting you with 1 massive arrow that is usually dominated and full of pumps. But Lexi is going to try to string together 3 or 4 arrows a turn, and Blizzard is essentially just a red Arctic Incarceration you can think of, because it's going to tax them 2 and give them a frostbite. So it is going to cost them, it is just presenting them with disruption on 2 fronts, costing them 3 resources. So Blizzard is really important in those matchups. It's really important against Dash and things like that. So as where Brain Freeze and Icebind are cards number 52, 53, and 54. Arctic Incarcerations are cards number 55, 56, and 57. So for the matchups where you're going to bring in Brain Freeze, you're probably going to bringing in Blizzard. And for the matchups where you're going to bring in Icebind, you're probably going to be bringing in Arctic Incarceration. So just think of it that way. These are cards 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57 for either way. So if you're going against aggro, go wide decks, Brain Freeze and Blizzard. If you're going against more slower, grindy matchups, Arctic Incarceration, Icebind. The decks where these don't work, these work. The decks where these don't work, these work. Hope that makes a little bit more sense. I should have just explained that like that. Next, we got 3 copies of Read the Ripples. Read the Ripples is like one of those sleeper cards that I absolutely love. I started testing this out when I started coming into the inertia equation. When I started to try to deal with inertia, I was looking for ways, and Read the Ripples kind of just like fits that role really nicely. It costs 0. It's blue. It does only block for 2, which is kind of a bummer, but at the beginning of your end phase, destroy Read the Ripples, then opt 1 and draw a card. So if you're presented with an inertia token, you can actually stack those triggers any way you want. You can stack the trigger of Read the Ripples after the inertia breaks or before the inertia breaks. Obviously, you want to stack it after the inertia breaks. So the inertia is going to break. It's going to destroy all your cards. Then Read the Ripples is going to break. It's going to let you opt and then draw a card and then have a card to put in the arsenal. So kind of negating the whole inertia token thing. Inertia isn't like the biggest threat to this deck because this deck is primarily a more proactive deck. Like I keep using that word. It does want to be playing on your turn mostly. Losing a card for arsenal isn't like the biggest deal in the world, because mostly that card is just going to be a little bit of extra taxation. It does hurt. It definitely does hurt, because oftentimes we are putting things like freezing points or weather vanes in our arsenal to save them for next turn, to save up for these big massive plays. And it can be difficult to deal with. So Read the Ripples comes in for that. So against like the Assassins and the Rangers, Read the Ripples is going to come in, and it is going to be the final cards for that matchup. But I actually really like Read the Ripples, just being able to like opt one and filter through your deck a little bit faster, and then choose whatever card you want to put in the arsenal. It does let you like kind of play out these like full hands and like follow up with Waning Moon or something like that, and not worry about like having an arsenal, because you can just always opt and then play an arsenal. So Read the Ripples is a card that I generally only bring in for the Assassins and the Rangers, but I really like it. I hope you guys play around with it. It is a really nice inertia counter. And then last we have lastly, but we have 4 more cards. We have 1 blue Weathervane. 1 blue Weathervane. There are only a couple matchups that I don't bring this in. I bring this into almost every single matchup. In fact, there are very few matchups that I don't bring Weathervane in. This might as well be card number 52 of the main board. And let's just consider it that. The only matchup I don't bring this in, if I'm thinking about it, you know, I really can't think of one, and I'm sorry. Maybe you guys will find one. Well, let's just consider this card number like 70 or 52. This is going to come into just about every single matchup. It is important to keep your ice count high. It's blue. It is an additional Weathervane. And it can really, the main reason I run 1 is because you don't want to run any more than 1. You don't want to be breaking on Weathervanes. 7 is kind of the magic number as far as I've found, at being able to find Weathervanes in a timely manner. If you run any more than 7, you are greatly increasing your risk of breaking on Weathervanes. Drawing more than 2 in a hand can be absolutely devastating, and going up to 9 Weathervanes is very, very, very dangerous. So I cut 2 blues, and I found that the consistency of this deck went way up, just running 7, but I still like to have the 1 blue. And the reason that I like to run blue is because this can facilitate a massive end game play. It is the only Weathervane that can be played from Arsenal, and you can pair it up with like a freezing point or something like that. And that is kind of the play there, is sticking a Weathervane in Arsenal. It is going to create a Frostbite when you play it from Arsenal, and then it is going to create 2 additional Frostbites when you Ice Fuse. So a blue Weathervane can be the equivalent when you pair it with something like a freezing point. You can pair it with anything to facilitate an end kill. But let's say you pair this with a freezing point, and your game has gone nice and long, and you have 3 Frost Hexes nice and established, or even you have 2. But let's say you have 3. This is like a great scenario. And you have a blue Weathervane in Arsenal, and you break your boots and you pair it with a freezing point. Now this is going to create a Frostbite on Icelander's trigger, and then it's going to create 2 more Frostbites on the freezing point trigger. So it's going to add 3 additional damage to freezing point, and then it's going to add 9 additional damage due to the Frostbites. So this is so 1 blue Weathervane from Arsenal in like an end combo kill can be the equivalent of 12 additional damage. Now, if you only have 2 Frost Hexes out, it's still going to give 3 additional damage to freezing point, and then it's going to give an additional 4 damage. So I'm sorry. It's gonna come in for 4 damage. So it's gonna come in for an additional 6 damage with only 2. So it can either equal 9 or 6. depending on how many Frost hexes you have out. But if the game's going nice and long, and it is one of those like slower grinding matchups like Dash or something like that, pitching a blue Iyslander Weathervane to the end and pitching a freezing point to the end, and then following it up like on a combo kill of blue Weathervane from Arsenal, freezing point on the back of boots, can, you know, boost your freezing point up an additional 3 damage and create an additional 3 frostbites equaling 9 damage. So it can equal a massive 12 points of damage, which is really, really huge. And people who don't like blue Weathervane don't know how to use it properly, and that is kind of what it is there for. It's not there to be used early, although it can be used early in some of like the faster matchups where even two frostbites played on your turn can make a big difference. This is mainly in there to facilitate like that combo kill where the one blue Weathervane can equal 12 points of damage, and it's huge. So this comes into, I think, just about every single matchup. Maybe I wouldn't bring this in against Azalea, because having one additional 2-block in the deck can be kind of devastating. It can really make or break it. But any deck, any hero that you're not too worried about having that additional even one additional 2-block in the deck, I would bring in one blue Weathervane. And to tell you the truth, I bring it into just about every single matchup. And then lastly, we have 2 Fendel's Fighting Spirit in yellow and 1 Nourishing Emptiness. 2 Fendel's Fighting Spirit in yellow. This comes in just for Dromai. This is a popper, along with Nourishing Emptiness. And it is important because Fendel's Fighting Spirit in yellow, next to Down and Dirty, is the best popper in the game. And this popper works just a little bit better in this deck. I haven't really tested Down and Dirty, but I'm willing to test it. But the reason I run yellow Fendel's Fighting Spirit is because it's still a popper and it will gain you a life. But it is very, very important to be able to keep your resource count high enough in that matchup. Drawing into an extra red, because if it was the red Fendel's Fighting Spirit, can be really, really devastating. And there's a lot of times, if you're playing that matchup correctly, where you don't need the poppers. These are just in there for emergency uses only. So I would never, ever run more than 3. Because drawing more than 1 popper in a hand, if you take it up to 4 poppers, drawing more than 1 in a hand can be devastating. And the reason it's yellow is because of the pitch count. Having more reds in hand than necessary, like this can still pay for Moon, even if you don't need to use it as a popper. You know what I mean? Like this can still pitch for yellow and pay for Moon, or pay for something else. So being yellow is very, very important. Being able to gain you a life when it pops is very important. Being able to pop a dragon is very important. But Fendel's Fighting Spirit only comes in for Dromai. I only run 2 copies because I don't ever want to run more than 3 poppers, because you're time walking Dromai every single turn. You are presenting her with so much disruption and so many frostbites and taxing her so much that she shouldn't be able to be attacking with dragons or casting these big dragons in the first place. And if she's smart and she knows how to play that matchup, she's going to really prioritize Chrome Eye and Mirror Guy in that matchup anyways. So the fact that this costs yellow is very important. And lastly, we have Nourishing Emptiness. Nourishing Emptiness is a bomb-ass card. I love this card so much. And I run 1 copy into Dromai, but I also run 1 copy into anybody I expect to be running AB3 into. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the next couple cards of the meta a little bit. But truth be told, I have been running into so many people who have been running AB2 or less, AB1 even. Some decks I've run into that haven't had no AB. Iyslander's representation in the meta right now is so low, and Kano is such a fringe deck that people are dropping their AB. Throughout Baltimore weekend, I didn't run into a single deck that was running AB3, except for Odom, and that he was running Crown in AB2, so you consider that AB3 if you want. But there was nobody that I ran into that I actually ran Nourishing Emptiness into. But if you run into a deck that is running Arcane Barrier 3, Nourishing Emptiness comes in because it is massive. Some of the decks you can probably expect to still be on AB3 would be like Dory or even Azuri right now. I've found that she's running AB3 because she's so afraid of Encase. Encase just completely shuts her hero ability off and makes her hero ability useless. So anyone that you expect to be running more Arcane Barrier than Armor, Nourishing Emptiness comes in, because this deck with a 5-card hand and a card in Arsenal can just facilitate massive plays. We can just do so much damage. We can just do so much disruption. We can sometimes pair 2 Weathervanes with an Aether Ice Vein, which is absolutely unheard of. It's just busted what this deck can do with a 6-card hand, 5 in hand and 1 in Arsenal. So if you can comfortably and confidently necessitate that you can get a Nourishing Emptiness to hit, I would run it. So that being said, because there is so little AB in the arsenal, and I mean in the meta, and people are running more armor nowadays, and Nourishing can be blocked, this card might become a down and dirty. I might turn Nourishing into down and dirty. That is a flex spot. That is for you guys to decide. Like, if your meta is all full of AB, if people are still on AB, then Nourishing Emptiness comes in. If you are running into every matchup where this is just a dead card, where you can't possibly get a Nourishing to hit because everybody has armor, then maybe this card becomes a down and dirty or a 3rd copy of Fendel's Fighting Spirit yellow. That is a possibility. I haven't tested down and dirty in the Dromai matchup, but it is something that I should test, and it is on my radar, because being able to pop from Arsenal is pretty awesome, and that card is really good. But this is a flex spot if you are not in the Nourishing Emptiness. Maybe this could be another popper, but if not, I don't know. That's currently what my sideboard is, and the matchups that I bring in the sideboard. Lastly, I want to talk about 2 cards. And that is Aether Ice Vein blue and Icebind red. Icebind red, I am greatly considering bringing 3 copies into my sideboard. And part of the reason is because that lack of Arcane Barrier, Icebind's stock goes up just a little bit more. Because it only comes in for 3 arcane damage, and before in the meta there was a whole lot of Arcane Barrier, and it was very rare that you could actually get this to hit in the matchups that mattered. This card is absolutely awesome in the Ranger matchups. Being able to deal them arcane damage. I have never played against a Ranger with Arcane Barrier 3. I have never have, except for maybe Riptide, who is running his Trench. But we're not going to talk about Riptide today. I'm more focusing on Azalea and Lexi. Being able to freeze a card in their arsenal is huge. I played against Alexi today where I was testing Icebind, and I froze her 3 of a kind in her arsenal, and then I followed up with just a whole bunch of disruption and made it like 4 turns in a row where it was just impossible for her to actually play that 3 of a kind. And by then I was so far ahead, and part of the reason was because of Icebind. And this can freeze a card in Azalea's arsenal as well. But Azalea can always Azalea that away. She can still flip it over with her cross wrap, and she can, just because it's frozen, she can still Azalea in another card to give it dominate. So having a frozen card in her arsenal, she still can find some ways to dance around that. But if not, if she's not Azaleaing a dominated arrow, freezing a card in her arsenal can be massive because it can just completely shut her down. The same thing with Lexi. She still has 2 arsenal slots, and this only freezes 1, but it can be really huge. It can prevent you a lot of damage to where, you know, she can only play 1 card out of arsenal. Freeze the card that she's going to flip up so that she can't give her next card go again, or give you a frostbite or something like that. There's a lot of things that Icebind, there's a lot of reasons why Icebind's stock goes way up in this new meta. So I am really considering trying to find 3 places to bring in Icebind. And the 3 cards that I would be most willing to cut would probably be Fendel's Fighting Spirit and Nourishing Emptiness, because I think Nourishing Emptiness stock goes down just a little bit in this new meta, and I think Icebind's stock goes up just a little bit in this new meta. And I really don't think that we need poppers if we're playing this deck correctly in the Dromai match. These are just in here kind of as a, like, an oh shit, like, emergency button. where things get kind of out of hand and you just really need a popper. But you're only running 3, so most of the Dromai matchups that I play, I am not popping dragons. I don't need to pop dragons. And in fact, I'm just pitching Fendel's Fighting Spirit to pay for Waning Moon or that. So Nourishing Emptiness's stock in this meta goes down considerably the less AB that is being presented by these decks. And Icebind's stock goes way up. So this is a massive consideration to bring Icebind in. And if you were... you don't want to keep your red count any higher. So if you were going to side in Icebind, you would probably side out Polar Cap. So this would come out, Icebind would come in. Not permanently, just for the match. These is still going to stay in the deck because of how well it pairs with Weathervane and one additional Frostbite. Even though it's not like the most taxing or disruptive thing, it is still something. So my consideration is to, and this is something I would love to talk to you guys about. If you guys are still watching this video, sound off in the comments. Let me know what you think. But I'm currently testing 3 red Icebind in replace of, in the deck, 2 Fendel's Spirit and 1 Nourishing Emptiness. As much as I love Nourishing, the stock of this card has gone way down due to how much more armor and less Arcane Barrier I have been being presented with in the meta. And then lastly, I want to talk about Aether Icevane Blue. Is there a consideration to run a 9 of Aether Icevane? Yes and no. And the reason I don't have it sleeved up and the reason it's just over here is because I have tested this a lot and I'm not as happy with it as I should be. Most of the time this gets caught in Arsenal and I just don't want to be playing this out of Arsenal. I don't want to be paying for 3 resources for something from Arsenal. Yes, it can deal some damage and strip a card from your opponent, but it just doesn't really fit the game plan as well as I wish it would. And I don't know what I would cut. The only thing I would cut to play that would probably be Blue Icebind. But Blue Icebind is important because it is 0 cost. So these are your flex spots right here. Aether Icevanes, blue, instead of Blue Icebind. This is something I would love to hear people test and tell me if you guys think it works or not. But this is a card that I am greatly considering including in and cutting these 3 right here. Now I'm going to need to do some more testing, but going forward in a meta with such low Arcane Barrier, Icebind is massive. Being able to freeze a card in Arsenal, not only just for the Rangers, but for anybody is huge. Just taking them off that Arsenal spot. It's really good into, I played it into Briar and I just was able to freeze her Channel Mod Heroic in her Arsenal, and by the time she was able to play it like 4 turns later, like it didn't really matter. I was able to freeze being able to freeze cards in ninjas arsenals. A lot of times your ninjas are going to put that that Art of War or something just massive in their arsenal and just sit on it, and being able to freeze it is really important. So Red Icebind stock goes way up in a meta that is less focused on Arcane Barrier, and these cards kind of go down. And that being said, a meta that is less focused on Arcane Barrier. The reason I didn't run Aether Icevane Blue before is because everybody had AB3. Everybody had AB3 because Iyslander was everywhere. But now that her representation has gone down so much, does Aether Icevane Blue come back in? I'll let you guys decide that. Currently, for me, the answer is no, but I could definitely be convinced to run 9 Aether Icevanes because it is so strong. But the last reason is because it is difficult to pair these with Weathervanes. You need a Tunic resource, or you need an energy potion to pair an Aether Icevane, red, yellow, or blue, with a Weathervane. And Icebind, because it costs 0, does pair with Weathervanes very, very nicely, and that is one of the reasons that cards must cost 0. And Aether Icevane costing 3, running a 9 of means you have 9 instances of a spell in your deck that is difficult to pair with Weathervane. Is it worth it? Because of how devastating Blue Aether Icevane is when it hits, you know, and you can get it to hit. I'll let you guys decide that. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Currently, these are my flex spots of the deck. Blue Iyslander Weathervane is card number 52. It comes in every single matchup. Just to go over again, you're either going to run Brain Freeze or Icebind. You're either going to run Blizzard or Arctic Incarceration Blue. You're going to Read the Ripples comes in for the Rangers, and Expose the Elements comes in for the Wizards and for anybody who you think is going to be running Crown of. All right, guys. I hope that explained a little bit. I hope that helped a lot. Just leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I do a ton of Wizard content. I have a ton of gameplay videos coming out. I have a bunch of Kano content coming out. Some of it today I'm working on. And yeah, peace out, Wizards. Let me know what you think. Later.